Hello everyone and welcome to another very important game for the final standings, as whoever wins this tournament and the second placed one qualify for the FIDE Candidates Tournament 2026. It is a game between Richárd, Rapport and Parham Maghsoodloo, two players. Whoever they're playing against, you are expecting a great game, and if they're playing each other, of course, we expect no less. So yeah, let's check it out. And the game started 8 hours ago, and there is one game still being played. Now it's currently 8 hours and 1 minute. Nodirbek Abdusatrov is trying to beat Yaus Khan, and he's up a pawn, but it's a pretty crazy game. It could last even another hour, so I have no idea when that one will finish. But yeah, let's check it out. I'm mentioning this because I don't know if I will be able to properly show you the standings after this round has been played, as that game is still being played. So, okay, Richárd with white opens with pawn to d4. Sorry about that. We have pawn to d5 by Parham, knight to f3, and knight to f6. Parham, the sole leader going into this round. If he wins, he remains the sole leader. That's just how chess works. We have bishop to f4. Pawn to c5 and pawn to e3. Richárd going for his well-known London system. We have knight to c6 and knight b to d2. We have bishop to g4 and pawn to c3. We have pawn to e6 and queen to b3, putting pressure on the b7 pawn. So this has all been played before, nothing new here. Queen to c8, defending on b7 with the queen, and pawn to h3, inviting the capture on f3. Parham goes back with bishop to e2, and now pawn to h6. And there are a couple of games that reach this position. Bishop to b1 is a known move. Also, pawn to a4 is a known move. But here we have queen to d1, and it is now, as of move 10, that we have a completely new game. And here we have bishop to e7. Parham just continues developing nicely. We have bishop to d3, unpinning, or rather not unpinning, but self-pinning. Probably preparing pawn to g4 to go after the black king. But you know Parham. Parham always castles in the face of danger, and he just goes castles king side. Pawn to g4 by Richárd, bishop to g6, and we have a trade. Captures. Parham not worried about messing up his pawn structure and weakening the e6 pawn. He says this is perfectly fine. Bishop to g3. We have queen to e8 now, adding a defender to that g6 pawn, and also maybe once the bishop moves, you can advance the pawn to e5. We have queen to e2, pawn to a6, and pawn to a4, followed by rook to c8. Parham looking to open up that c-file for his rook, and Rapport was maybe thinking of castling queenside, but now as b5 is ready, the rook is already on c8. That would be, not a wise decision against Parham. We have castles and now pawn to g5, and we have a, it's not a closed structure. You can try h4, h5, but it's a pretty static king side. We have d captures on c5, bishop captures on c5, pawn to b4, all very natural moves and not a lot to explain here. Bishop to e7, and now even pawn to b5 by Richárd. A captures, knight to d8, and rook f to c1, defending the pawn on c3. Knight f7, we have pawn to e4, d captures on e4, and now knight to d4, putting pressure on that e6 pawn, as it is not defended by anything. So bishop to c5, now the queen is defending the e6 pawn, and knight captures on e4. We have knight captures on e4, queen captures on e4, and just pawn to e5. Chasing away the knight, Richárd goes knight to f5. You can't really use any other squares there, as it could be, well, for the moment, there's really no danger with the bishop on g3, but it's best to keep it closed. And also, the f5 square is beautiful for the white knight, but Parham just kicks it away. Again, not worried about weakening his king side. Richárd goes back, but not to e3. He actually goes back to d4. And it seems like he's offering a full piece here for queen captures on g6. Is that a good decision or not? Well, for a Rapport, it would be good if Parham actually captured this, because if captures, queen captures on g6, king h8, and now you either go for some sort of a perpetual immediately, or first you throw in a rook e1. The reason why I'm throwing in a rook e1 is because you could potentially make black make a mistake. For example, queen d7, and now queen f6 check. Let's say king to h7, and now if king h7 is played, which is losing, then you have this really cool win of rook to e6. And after rook, okay, you want to stop, let's say rook g8, you go rook g8 to stop queen g6, queen f5 check, and that's it. You have to resign here. King g7, queen, rook g6 check, and you're going to pick up the queen on d7. So yeah, it's a move that either Rapport wins, but you know, like 98% that it's a draw, or maybe even 99%. But you know, crazy things do happen in chess. So king to h7, Parham says no easy draw for you today, good sir, and Rapport has to go back. Knight to b3 attacks the bishop, and now knight to d6. Throws in an attack against the white queen, queen to d5, and now queen to f7, offering a queen trade, and Richárd goes for it. Queen captures, we have rook captures, and pawn to c4. So this is the current position. The material is equal. The bishops are of the same color. One thing that maybe Rapport has going for himself is that he has 2 versus 1 on the queen side. So if you manage to trade off some of the pieces, and maybe you can push c5, c6, you could let's say potentially create a passed pawn. So okay, pawn to h5 by Parham, going after the white's king side. We have knight captures on c5, rook captures, and rook to e1, putting pressure on the e5 pawn. Knight captures on c4, and now the pawn is defended. So Richárd goes rook 8 to c1, puts pressure on the knight. Now you're sort of threatening to capture the pawn, because whatever you capture with, you either weaken the knight or the rook. But Parham finds this very annoying h4, bishop to h2, and pawn to b6 sequence, where you really aren't threatening anything. That pawn is now defended, but Parham's pieces are a bit less active than Parham would want to. So if you want to keep that pawn, you will have to, have a little bit of passivity among pieces. So king to g2, we have rook f to c7, now threatening to pick up the pawn as the knight will be defended, and rook to c3. And here the question is, what is the idea behind rook to c3? Well, the idea is if rook captures, then you can capture on e5. That's really the idea. Now the bishop defends the rook, and if knight captures, you can capture the rook on c7. So that's why Parham moves the rook to c8 out of bishop's path, and now we have rook to d1. Here, Richárd could have played something else. He could have also played something like rook to e4, just making rook capture some b5 impossible, as the knight would hang here. But he decided to go active. He played rook to d1 because he already sacrificed one pawn. This is sacrificing another pawn. Parham captures it. Rook captures on b5, and now rook to d7 with check. King to g8, which looks really awesome, as you've committed your king to the back rank. And now if this rook, let's say, somehow finds its way over to e7, then you no longer have to worry about anything with white. It's either a draw or you win. And here Richárd tries bishop to g1. Also interesting would be rook f3. Like I said, if you can play rook f3, rook f7, you should be able to have a great game. But after rook f8, stopping that, and now let's say you go back, rook to c3, trying to force a perpetual, black can also go rook c5. And now after, let's say, rook to b7, you put the rook behind the passed pawn, b5. And it's, well, we have to say it's a little bit better for black. The white rook on the 7th rank is annoying, but it's very, very difficult to actually do something about it. You could go rook to d3, then rook f7. You don't allow rook to d7. And if rook to b8 with check, king g7, and now you can potentially get the 2 rooks over to the back rank, but it's not as potent as on the 7th rank, because here king has access to f6. And there just won't be any checkmating threats, so you're just gonna have to deal with the passed b pawn for the rest of the game. Even though this is still a draw, it's it's a crazy position. So here Richárd tries bishop to g1 with a very particular idea, and not sure how far he looked, but this is move 41. Time control has been reached, and they're still burning a lot of time. Okay, Parham goes rook b2. He stops the pawn from moving. We have rook to e7. Now putting pressure on the e5 pawn, so the knight cannot move. Pawn to b5, and now rook to d3. Hoping for rook to d7, but Parham stops it, of course. We have rook to d2. Rook captures on d2. If you don't trade rooks, you could also move the rook, but then, this rook can come to f8, and it's not the best position. Or you just put this rook on b8 behind the passed pawn and you start advancing it. So it would be a very difficult position to play with white. So rook captures on d2. We have knight captures on d2, and now rook to b7, getting the rook behind the passed pawn. And you could also capture on e5 if you're wondering, why not just capture on e5? Well, it would actually be more precise. And after, let's say, pawn to b4, rook to b5, you play b3. And okay, that's a passed pawn on b3, but, how are you ever touching that b2 square? That is the question. That is not what happened in the game. In the game, rook to b7 was played right away, saying, okay, I don't have to go after the pawn. And now there is one move that is either winning or can potentially lead to a win for Parham. Probably the one that Richárd missed. So try to figure it out while I give you a couple of seconds. The move is, of course, rook to c5, putting the rook right in front of Richárd's bishop on g1, saying that that was a terrible idea from the start, and there's nothing you can do. I'm up 2 pawns, and you have nothing to show for it. So you have to go for pawn to f4. It's your only counterplay. Pawn to f4, and now... Parham sort of allows Richárd back into the game. He plays rook to d5, but the position is still incredibly complicated. The most precise idea is rook c3, and now it's very, very difficult for white to even make a move. Point being that if you capture the pawn on b5, look at this, rook g2 check, and you start losing everything here. Or even worse, if you go king to h2, knight f3 check, king h1, and rook captures on g1 will be checkmate. So yeah, after pawn to f4, we have rook to d5, also very, very strong and not easy to handle. F captures on g5, and now knight to e4. We have bishop to e3, Rapport trying to hold on to that g5 pawn, but the bishop here is simply horrendous. We have rook to d3, attacking the bishop, bishop to a7, and now just knight captures on g5, and not a lot for Rapport to do here. There's a... if you sacrifice a pawn in chess or 2 for initiative, you have to do something with that initiative. If you don't, you just end up in an endgame where you are down a pawn or 2. So rook captures on b5, and now rook to g3 with check. We have king to f1, and knight captures on h3. We have rook captures on e5, and now rook captures on g4. And that means that Parham is now up 2 connected passed pawns. We have rook to d5. Of course, Richárd will try, but it's not going to be easy. King f7, we have rook to d3, knight to f4, and rook to d4. Trying something, but there is nothing here. We have king to e6, rook to e4, pawn to g5. Now the pawns will just start marching forward. We have bishop to f2 and pawn to h3. Rook to a6 with check. We have king to f5, rook to a5 check, king to g6, and rook to a6 with check. King to h5 and rook to a7, rook to g2, and now comes bishop to e3. We have pawn to h2, rook to h7 with check, and king to g4. And here Rapport makes the final attempt. Bishop captures on f4, hoping for an automatic recapture by the king or something, and then you can capture the rook on g2. But Parham just played rook to g1 check, and he was in this position on move 64 that Richárd Rapport resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So yeah, beautifully played by both of them, but it is Parham who takes this one. And as he went into this round as the leader, he emerges out of this round also as the leader. So he's the sole leader going into the next round. And I'm going to discuss the standings a little bit, but I have no idea, as the game between Nodirbek and Yas Khan was still happening when I started recording. So it could still be going on. But yeah, here after you moved, of course, just you queen captures, and now there's a rook and a pawn versus a bishop, of course, completely winning. Let me just quickly check on that game. No, they're still playing. They're still playing it. Sorry about that. Let me just make it a little smaller. Yeah, still playing it. It's move 161, and it doesn't seem like it's gonna be over anytime soon. So we will discuss the standings in the next video. But for now, Parham Maghsoodloo is the sole leader going into the next round. Use that hashtag suggestion, and I will cover as many games as possible, and then we're gonna go through the standings properly. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Knightmaster Bishop, Christian Fisher, Carmen Polifronio, Austin Wheeler, and Ali Yurukoglu for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.